Why did Rome become so powerful? At its greatest extent in the early 2nd century AD, the Roman Empire stretched from the Pacific coast of Spain and Africa in the west to the shores of the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf in the east, from Hadrian's Wall in the north of modern-day England to the city of Hieris Sacamenus deep in the Upper Nile to the south. This mighty empire encompassed the whole of the Mediterranean Sea and brought literally hundreds of different cultures under the reign of a single unifying power. But in the 8th century BCE, the future city of Rome was one of thousands of villages scattered across the European continent. If we could time travel back to them, our modern eyes would see these places as superficially similar enough to each other that Rome's future success would by no means be obvious. So why did Rome become powerful enough to dominate its neighbors? Well, I am the world-renowned historian for Long History Short, and here are 4 reasons why. Whoops, I lied. Switcheroo, kiddos. First, let's talk about a couple of bad reasons. Number 1 bad reason. There is an idea that Rome was so powerful because, gosh golly gee, the Roman people were just the bestest. Strong of back and pure of heart, possessed of a singular awesomeness that no other peoples could hope to equal. A sort of ancient Ubermensch. Now this idea is very old and very antiquated, and nobody takes it all that seriously. Read any very old pre-World War II scholarship on Rome and you might see some form of this idea that Romans were just that freaking great. This is of course not to say they weren't good at an awful lot of things, but that tone can become hero worship in older scholarship. If it isn't worshipful of Rome, then it's worshipful of certain historical figures from Rome, particularly the great generals Scipio and certainly most notably Julius Caesar. Now obviously you need talented people in order to succeed at things, and the 2 generals I mentioned are or were certainly talented, but this sort of quote-unquote great men history, where they are solely responsible for Rome's greatness simply by virtue of how awesome they are, has completely fallen out of favor. Now the second bad reason, Rome was just simply more warlike than surrounding peoples. Now this one actually has some credence among modern historians, but I don't give it a ton of credence personally for a lot of reasons. You know, the idea of beating up on other people and taking their stuff or their land was very well established and pretty well universal by the time Rome came along. Civilizations and cities had existed for thousands of years by then. Empires had come, flourished, and gone away before Rome existed. So I don't buy at all that Rome was more warlike than anyone else. So the bad reasons out of the way, here are 4 actual reasons that Rome dominated its neighbors. Reason number 1. Everyone was warlike, but Rome was really, really, really good at it. So yes, by the time Rome comes around, pretty much everyone in the world has figured out that you can beat up other peoples, come around, and take their stuff. What the Romans brought to this is excellent organization and a focus on logistics, at a time when other people's idea of war was probably fairly outdated. Gather all the available men in the community, stick something sharp in their hand, and boom, you're ready to fight. Now Rome definitely took it further than that. Not only were their men well organized and generally better trained, there was a focus on logistics and supply lines when they had to go fight somewhere far away. For instance, there was an event called the Samnite Wars, where they were struggling a bit to fight these people, the Samnites, in their, rough sort of mountainous terrain, until they built what would become the famous Via Appia. Clean supply line, boom, good to go. And they were always getting better at military organization. There was a guy called Marius in the very late 2nd century BCE who instituted what has since become known as the Marian Reforms, altering how the Romans viewed their military. Marius opened military service up to poor guys, notably, and you can guess the effect on enrollment this had. Spoiler alert, it swelled. He provided retirement benefits in the form of land elsewhere in the empire, further helping to spread Rome's power as veterans would settle elsewhere in conquered lands. Perhaps it is no surprise that 2 centuries after these reforms, the empire would reach its greatest extent. You can't overestimate the importance of military organization and a recognition of the importance of logistics, even in the ancient world, especially in the ancient world. It really does make the difference between defeat and victory. Added to that, in warfare, even when they met a similarly well-organized foe, the Roman mindset was extremely adaptable. During the First Punic War, for instance, Rome was absolutely getting crushed at sea by the Carthaginians, who were goddamn Popeye on a spinach diet when they were on the sea. Seriously, their quinqueremes were the weapons of mass destruction of their day. So Rome captured a wrecked quinquereme, reverse-engineered its design, and built 100 of them in 2 months, all while training crews how to row them. Now this is the ancient equivalent of George Patton telling Erwin Rommel, "You magnificent bastard, I read your book." So that is reason number 1. Everyone was warlike, but Rome was really, really, really good at war. Reason number 2, location, location, location. Yeah, we gotta talk a little geography. First of all, look at this map. Rome is here. What do you notice about that spot? Well, it's fairly kind of centralized, isn't it? Now, by a coincidence that ended up being very happy for them, The Romans found themselves smack in the middle of north-south trade routes and east-west trade routes. People over here want something from people over here, maybe they meet in the middle and exchange it there. And that's actually really good for those guys in the middle. If there's one thing that history has taught us, it's that being in the middle of a trade route is a very good thing, from Antioch to medieval Baghdad to modern times. It's a great way to get rich. Even on a smaller scale, Rome occupied the center of several important routes, from the salt pans at the mouth of the Tiber to the river banks at the interior of Italy, from Etruria to Campania, a route which crossed the river at, you guessed it, ancient Rome. Now, Rome was inland enough to protect from sea attackers, but not quite so far inland that they couldn't use the sea for trade themselves. They also built the city famously on a group of hills, supposedly 7, but it's actually more than that. Rome is hilly is the point, which both provided protection from summer heat and easy protection from potential invaders. The Tiber River provided plenty of fresh water. Basically, all this boils down to, based on geography, Rome was a really awesome place to put a city. Reason number 3, manpower. Yes, sometimes warfare is as simple as I've got more dudes than you, and this is especially true of the ancient world. Rome's land was not the most fertile land in Italy, but it was pretty fertile, so it could support a good population right from the start. And once they'd conquered the peninsula, it was on, baby. You see, after they'd gotten rich and powerful, other communities had it in their best interest to ally with them. And Rome set up this complicated system of friendship with Rome, all the way from casual acquaintance to bestie. And the rewards for being a bestie, a BFF, were plenty. More importantly to Rome, those besties were able to serve in the army. Now, this was somewhat unusual in the ancient world, where alliances certainly existed, but for the most part, people tended to stick to themselves. Rome's willingness to assimilate was so great that they even granted religious freedom to people they assimilated, so long as they also honored the Roman state and the gods of Rome. Now, the practical upshot of this was that Rome simply had more dudes to throw at a war than anyone else could field at the time. Nowhere was this more clear than during the Punic Wars, when Carthage fielded armies of African mercenaries. Rome fielded armies with absurd numerical superiority. We're kind of unsure if we can trust the numbers in the ancient sources, but we do know that Rome had a lot more dudes than Carthage did. So many men that an advisor to the king Pyrrhus of Epirus claimed that they were like a hydra. That is, you kill one and 2 will spring up in his place. Now, you cannot overestimate the importance of manpower to Rome's power and influence. And reason number 4 why Rome dominated its neighbors, well, they didn't really. Whoopsie daisy, there's another plot twist. Okay, fine. Rome dominated most of its neighbors, that's true. But they knew which fights to pick, and more crucially, they knew which fights not to pick. Notably, this big empire called Parthia coexisted next to a very powerful Rome for about 500 years. And Rome only went after them a couple of times, and they regretted it every time. One notable time, a fellow called Crassus, he's important, and we'll talk about him more at a later date, attacked Parthia in 53 BC. Long story short, Crassus got his ass handed to him and he lost several aquili, the legionary battle standards, a golden eagle, and a very important symbol of Roman power. Now, the first Roman emperor, Augustus, would eventually get these back in 20 BC. Basically, there was a coup in Parthia in which, through a rigmarole of political machinations, a Parthian prince ended up in Roman hands. The ruler of Parthia, Phraates IV, exchanged the standards captured 30 years previously for his son, who had been kidnapped by his would-be usurper. Now, Phraates saw these standards as a very small price to pay for the release of his son, while Augustus painted this to his domestic audience as this great victory over Parthia. Oh, aren't I great? I brought the Parthians to their knees. No, really, he had coins depicting exactly that, when it was entirely the result of an amicable political negotiation in reality. The point is that Augustus could have come at them all, blar, give me back those standards, or I'm gonna waste you. But he didn't do that. He negotiated a settlement and got them back. This certainly doesn't stop Augustus from claiming he had conquered the world. What contradiction? Stop looking at me like that. And it ended up being a win for him, and he could paint it in the propaganda however he liked. And at the end of the day, Rome and Parthia could basically go back to being cats on the sofa, aggressively ignoring each other. The point is that even in the ancient world, people could make rational geopolitical decisions, and Rome was smart enough not to blunder into a ruinous war with their eastern neighbor just because they thought they ruled and the Parthians drooled. Rome found a fight that they were not sure they could win, and so for the most part, they were careful not to pick that fight. Anyways, that's it for now. What reasons did I miss? Be sure to tell me in the comments what an idiot I am. And be sure to like or dislike, comment, and subscribe. Till next time, this is the world-renowned historian for Long History Short. Be good, kiddos. Out.